Last week, UK airline Flybe announced that they were going into administration. Given they were only recently rescued by the UK government, this isn't all that surprising. But the airline's collapse is a big hit to the UK's aviation industry. Flybe's failure isn't an isolated incident though, with airlines seemingly collapsing all over Europe at the moment. So in this video, we're going to discuss the Flybe case specifically, what caused their collapse, and why the government's rescue attempt didn't work. Then we're going to take a wider look at the other failed airlines, and ask the question, why do airlines keep going out of business? This is actually a topic we discussed in our latest podcast, alongside the ongoing outbreak that YouTube won't let us talk about, and the UK's upcoming budget. And if a long podcast isn't your thing, then we've just started releasing short clips of the show on individual topics, and you can find them on the TLDR podcast YouTube channel. Find links to the full podcast and the clips down below. Flybe was a British airline based out of Exeter in the southwest of England. Before their collapse, they carried 8 million customers a year, connecting 57 airports in 15 countries, and their 63 planes would fly over 210 different routes. They were primarily focused on the domestic market, with the majority of their hub and focus cities in the United Kingdom. This made the airline very important for many Brits, as one of few airlines connecting UK cities. In fact, the airline represented 36% of all domestic flights in January this year. This meant that people relied on Flybe's connections for work and leisure. Their flights were especially important for places like Northern Ireland and the Isle of Man, where customers often depended on the operator's flights. In fact, for the Isle of Man, Flybe holds an increased importance, as the airline held an NHS contract to transport patients to Great Britain when the treatment they required wasn't offered on the island. Other airlines may be able to fill the gaps left by Flybe, but without the airline, there'll be a major hole in many airports' offerings. And that means that Flybe weren't just important to their customers, they were also very important to many local and regional airports. Looking at data from the Civil Aviation Authority, Flybe represented a huge percentage of traffic at many of the UK's smaller airports, with the airline representing 90% of flights from Southampton and 80% of the flights to and from Exeter and Belfast City. This means that it could be harder for local travellers to find flights, but also makes it very difficult for the airports who have become reliant on Flybe. Without the airline, some of these airports might begin to struggle, affecting not just customers, but those who work there and the companies and contractors reliant on the airport's existence. The taxi drivers, baggage handlers, and local businesses. The GMB union estimates in addition to Flybe's 2,000 employees, 1,000 airport jobs will be lost as a result of the airline's collapse, as well as 800 further jobs within the wider economy, although some have been keen to highlight that these numbers could be a conservative estimate. Because of this, the UK government didn't want to see Flybe's demise. In fact, they were so keen to protect the airline that in January the government reached a deal with Flybe, which in effect set up a deferred payment plan with the struggling airline, delaying their huge £106 million tax bill. This over £100 million was owed to the government in the form of air passenger duty, a tax applied to all flights leaving a UK airport. Under the deal, Flybe was allowed to delay their payment in a move to try and keep the company afloat. As well as deferring the payment, the government promised a review of air passenger duty for domestic flights, which the airline hoped would result in lower taxes going forward. Despite these best efforts, the airline continues to struggle. They may have had their tax bill delayed, but their other costs continue to spiral. And with many expensive, unprofitable routes on their roster, life wasn't easy for Flybe. And as we now know, they entered administration on the 5th of March. These efforts almost certainly helped Flybe, but ultimately, demand continued to drop for the airline. Following the government's intervention, passengers became increasingly nervous about flying with Flybe, concerned that the airline wasn't stable and their flights could end up cancelled. This was combined with a drop in business travel following the outbreak of the coronavirus. Sorry, I forgot we're not allowed to say that on YouTube at the moment at risk of getting demonetized. We explain that in another video, it's linked below. Anyway, I'll refer to it as crown illness from now on, just to be safe. The illness led to fewer business trips and less domestic travel, an issue which continued to hurt the already struggling company. So that's why Flybe went into administration. Their costs continued to spiral, many of their routes failed to be profitable, Customers lost confidence in them, and crown illness seriously hit demand. Some of those issues are specific to Flybe and the UK market. But when you look around, you can see lots of examples of airlines collapsing around Europe and the world. And the last few years certainly haven't been kind to the aviation sector. 2017 saw the passing of Monarch and Air Berlin. 2018 was the end for Azur Air Germany, Cobalt Air, Primera Air, Small Planet Airways and Skywork. And 2019 marked the end of the line for Germania, Agile Azur, XL Airways, Adria Airways, Jet Airways, WOW Air, Thomas Cook and Flybe MI. Surely it can't be a coincidence that all of those airlines have collapsed in the last few years, and surely Flybe won't be the last. It's also worth paying attention to the time of year. Flybe first sought government assistance in January and finally collapsed in March. And this isn't at all surprising, with the winter season being notoriously difficult for airlines around the world, especially in Europe. When you look at the number of passengers per month in Europe, you can see a serious peak in the summer months, and then a huge drop-off in winter. This big variation in demand makes things hard for airlines, as they have to manage their fleet of planes, staff, and third-party contracts to cope with this wildly fluctuating demand. This explains why airlines like Flybe struggle in their winter months. Flybe had clearly been struggling for a while, but decreased seasonal demand, along with dropping consumer confidence and the crown illness, certainly didn't help. But this isn't just relevant to Flybe. Icelandic WOW Air also went out of business in March 2019, Germania and Flybe MI in February 2019, Jet Airways in April 2019, and Air Italy mere weeks ago in February 2020. And the other airlines I mentioned earlier, Monarch and Air Berlin both went under in October 2017, Azur Air Germany, Cobalt Air and Primera Air all collapsed within October 2018, with Small Planet Airlines joining the group in November 2018. Then in 2019, Agile Azur, XL Airways, Adria Airways and Thomas Cook all went under in September 2019. In an industry with such varying seasonal demand, it's hard for airlines to stay afloat year-round, leading to airlines closing in the autumn following a disappointing summer season and aware they can't make it through winter, or struggling through the winter and collapsing before the summer spike re-emerges. And this phenomenon goes a long way to explain why it's primarily European airlines struggling at the moment. That's because while this fluctuating graph is the reality for European carriers, markets operate differently around the world. Take the United States. Demand certainly still is seasonal, but the peaks and troughs are far less pronounced than in Europe. Or take a look at Asia Pacific, where seasonality plays a far smaller role in overall demand. So Europe's fluctuating demand certainly plays a major role in why airlines struggle to survive in the competitive European market. Actually, let's focus on that. The European airline market certainly is competitive. As anyone who regularly flies in Europe will know, the choice of airlines is pretty much limitless. Want a low-cost, low-frills flight to Barcelona? Try Ryanair, EasyJet or Vueling. Want a fancy weekend break to Paris? You've got it with British Airways or Air France. The competitiveness of the market is in theory a great thing, especially for customers. It pushes down costs, as well as forcing airlines to innovate, differentiate and improve their service. However, for airlines, the level of competition does make things more difficult. In fact, Simon Calder explained the issue to the BBC in very simple terms, saying that there are simply too many seats and not enough people. In recent years, as costs have fallen and deregulation spread across Europe, companies have been able to expand rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that the International Air Transport Association reports that there were 40% more flights in 2019 than 2009. To make this expansion possible, airlines have invested in new planes and staff, only making the issue of variable demand worse. Because having more planes in order to cope with summer demand only meant that you're left with more empty planes during the quiet winter months. These airlines have faced a variety of other issues in recent years too, likely none more significant than fuel costs. A number of the collapsed airlines I've mentioned have focused on long-haul but low-cost routes, and pretty much all the others have focused on short-haul low-cost routes. Both categories have one thing in common: their price. Prices which are supported by the low cost of fuel. These companies, especially the long-haul, more gas-guzzling ones, have been allowed to thrive in recent years due to falling fuel prices. These airlines thrive with these lower costs, able to expand, offer more routes, and reduce prices. However, when the cost of fuel began to creep up in the last couple of years, things began to get a bit more difficult for these airlines. And as we've seen, many of them started to drop out of the market entirely. And things are continuing to get harder for airlines. On the whole, fuel continues to get more expensive, and more countries are introducing higher taxes on airlines, often for environmental reasons. Crown illness has also put off travellers, especially business travellers, who are incredibly important to European airlines, as unlike most passengers, they tend to travel year-round. And in the UK, the weakened pound and uncertainty surrounding Brexit makes travel even harder for Brits. With all of these trends in place, it was never surprising to see Flybe fall, and it probably won't be long until another airline joins the list. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want more updates as we release further videos, and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. You can find us across Facebook, Twitter, Patreon and Instagram simply by searching for TLDR News. Special thanks to our Patreon backers whose support makes these videos possible.